Alrighty, let's get started. Another Tuesday, another WMUG Tuesday's webinar, and today with Erik, Loef, and Kenneth van Surksum, our own board members. So uh, we all know each other, so we don't need to do a quick introduction round. Um, Today they will be covering what is this modern authentication everybody is talking about, and why should I phase out legacy authentication? I believe a great session, so I will be quick so they can start after me. But thanks to our sponsors. Without any sponsors, we are not able to host events like this. Hopefully, somewhere next year we have an on-premises event again. But for now, every 2 weeks, WMUG Tuesdays webinars. So stay tuned for the next one. Follow us on social media, all the normal pages, and make sure to also like our YouTube channel so we can get rid of this ugly URL. I think we still need 20 people to like us, so do that. If you want to talk in 2 weeks, for instance, go to sessionize/WMUG-NL and submit your session. We don't have a big audience, so if you start presenting, submit your session, and yeah, let's get some experience. So, but now I want to hand over to Erik and Kenneth for their session. Guys, you may unmute.
Yeah, will do. Thanks, Peter, for the introduction. So let me switch my presentation. One moment, please. There we go. So, well, as you may know, this is a joint presentation between me and Erik. So during the presentation, we will do some switching between desktops and environments. So sorry for any inconvenience. But to actually start, well, welcome to our presentation. I think it's the longest presentation title from a session I have ever given. But I do think the title is clear, and what we are going to discuss during this webinar. So what we are going to do is we are going to talk about phasing out legacy authentication, why we think that is needed, and we hope actually to bring you into action and to do something about legacy authentication within your tenants as well. So to start with, maybe Erik, you can introduce yourself first.
Yes, welcome everyone. Nice to see a big audience, although it's just a normal Tuesday. My name is Erik Loef. I'm the CTO at Proxys, Microsoft Cloud Data Center MVP, and I know Kenneth and Peter for a long time because we are all together as board members of the the WMUG, as we call it in the Netherlands. So let's hand over to Kenneth.
Okay. My name is Kenneth van Surksum. I call myself a modern workplace consultant nowadays, but have had many titles already, and you should adopt that, of course, to what you are doing. So I implement modern workplace solutions at a lot of my customers. Besides that, I have a community heart, and therefore I'm an active member of the WMUG. Together with Erik and Peter and other members as well. I have a blog at vansurksum.com. Van Surksum is my last name, so that's not a common name, so that was free. So I registered that, and you can of course follow us on social media like Twitter. Hey, the agenda for today is that, of course, we are first going to explain what is legacy and modern and what it all means and why it's good and maybe why it's bad, etc. We have prepared lots of demos. And we are going to be honest with you as well. This is the first time we are doing this session, and therefore we reserved 1.5 hours of your time. It might be that we are finished after 1 hour. It might also be that we need a little bit more time. But there is room for questions. So if you have any questions, please ask it in the chat. Peter will probably interrupt us and ask the question when it's most convenient for us. So please ask your questions. We would appreciate that. Well, we are going to take you through some steps to migrate from legacy to modern authentication, because also here we have options. So we are going to explain that to you. We are going a little bit into detail on application consent. For the people actually joining our meeting last week, we had a whole session about application consent given by Thijs. So we will include a reference to that session as well if you want more information. And of course, to conclude our session, we have a call for action and actually explaining what you can do now to make sure that you're actually in time. So yeah, actually to discuss what legacy authentication is, I think actually the screenshot we have here is the best example we can give, namely that you actually provide a user ID and a password in order to connect to, for example, a cloud service or something living in the Microsoft cloud. And that is actually what is still provided by Microsoft. The option to only use your user ID and password. To be honest, you can even skip things like requiring multi-factor authentication if you use legacy authentication. So we see that most often when connecting to Exchange Online, where people can use legacy authentication to still access their mailbox. And basically that means that if, for example, for some reason the user ID and the password are compromised, that it's actually quite easy to access the mailbox of the user as well. So the issue with legacy authentication is that it's not secure anymore. And that's so we need to do something about that. And because of that, Microsoft actually announced that initially they would disable legacy authentication within their whole Office 365 Exchange Online environment in this month, this year. Only because of the current COVID-19 crisis, they actually created a new communication where they actually said, well, we are going to postpone this change to the second half of 2021. So that's next year. And to be more honest, that's in like 8 months. So there isn't much time to actually migrate. And I can tell you from experience, if you are going to wait for that moment that Microsoft is turning it off, you will probably have a little bit more support calls within your IT department. So more on that later. An additional reason actually to get rid of legacy authentication is that actually legacy authentication allows us to bypass conditional access. And therefore, actually, in order to fully leverage conditional access within our environments, we actually need to get rid of legacy authentication first. So legacy authentication and turning that off is actually a sort of prerequisite to also further implement modern authentication.
Yes, thank you, Kenneth. What I'm going to demonstrate is what Kenneth just told you. You enabled is also just a note from the field. I think half year ago, a customer said I turned on MFA and still I got hacked by getting an email from, hey, I lost my password. Click on the link. I provided my user and password. And how could that ever be? The customer doesn't understand how it's possible. Then I showed him this demo, then everything, all pieces came together. So let's give the demo about modern and legacy authentication and enabling MFA is not enough to secure your environment. I will start by yes, you can see my login prompt. Now, this is portal.office.com. I log in with an admin which has MFA enabled. I get the MFA prompt on my phone. Oh, let's see. I will accept it. So now you can see I'm logged in. I'm an admin. With one of the I'm an admin at the Proxies Ninjas, and I logged in with an MFA prompt. But in this tenant, still legacy authentication is enabled. If you enable now a tenant, then legacy authentication is blocked by default. But if you have a tenant for 2, 3, or 4 years old, it's still on if you haven't disabled it yet. Microsoft already done some GUI changes, so it makes it easier for the administrators to enable it. But let's start over to the legacy side. I will share the PowerShell screen in one moment. Look, if I log in with this PowerShell, it's just the old, many people will see it. It's the old way of managing your tenant. It's also deprecated, but it still works. And as you can see, you can get a legacy authentication form. I will log in with the admin. With the password. And I just showed everyone there was MFA enabled on the account. As you can see, I can log in with PowerShell on the Exchange, and I can get all kind of well-known PowerShell commands. And the problem is, if I go to get authentication policy, here you can see the allow basic authentication on PowerShell is true. If I set it to false, then I'm not able anymore to log in without MFA on my Exchange box. So it's also enabled for POP3, which is already old, SMTP, IMAP, MAPI. So it's also possible to disable it in the GUI since August this year. But this is basically the problem out legacy authentication, and some IT administrators think I enabled MFA, I am ready, I am secured. That's not true if you have enabled a legacy authentication. So that's the idea about this demo. Let's go back to the presentation. Teams. Yes. Okay. Here was the demo. If I go back a few years ago, maybe you already done this in 10 years, 15 years from now. I found a screenshot about Yahoo, and I had an email account at Yahoo, and it was possible by Yahoo to import your contacts from, for example, Facebook or Gmail or Windows Live Hotmail. So what you then did was fill in your username and your password from your Facebook account. Just the account you also log in with your Facebook or as an app on your phone. And then all the contacts can be imported on the Yahoo. But this system has many problems, of course, because your username and password is stored at Facebook. So if Facebook is hacked, your Yahoo is hacked. You do not only give access Facebook to or Yahoo access to all the accounts or the contacts of Facebook, but the complete Facebook account you gave them access. There is no terms of authorization. So username and password only was back in the days was a problem. Then there also came many smartphones. There are many smartphones 10, 15 years ago, which also don't understand cookies, all that kind of thing. Though there was a new way of authentication, authorization. Now, in this session, we want to talk about the standard which is Microsoft is using is OAuth 2.0. So let's, and it's very important, we think, that you understand the basics of OAuth 2.0 to troubleshoot and to understand application federation and to understand the new way of authorization and authentication Microsoft is using nowadays. Before you had Kerberos and NTLM on your on-premises environment. In the online world, everything is now based on REST APIs and OAuth 2.0. So let's take an example in mind and let's see how this will look in an OAuth 2.0 world. Let's explain it to you. First, one big step back. The same screenshot Kenneth showed about basic authentication. If you see this login prompt, then you are in a modern authentication world. It's that easy to understand. Am I now modern authentication or am I in basic authentication? So in the demo before, you saw both screens. Modern authentication, it's a token-based authentication mechanism. And I will explain it in the next slide what that really means. So let's take a look at the OAuth 2.0 flow. If you take the example, the yahoo.com, you want to import the context from example Hotmail. Before you entered your admin account or your personal account from Microsoft in the Yahoo database, and they get what they want. But now with OAuth 2.0, it works differently. Let's take a look. First, you will be redirected to the authorization server. With the redirection, there are some parameters. In this time we have two parameters. The response is code, which means you get a response in an authorization code. You can also have a response in token. I will come back to that later. And you get a redirect URI. This is the URI where you will be redirected, because from Yahoo you will be redirected to the Microsoft login page. And to make sure Microsoft gets you back to the Yahoo site, you have to enter the callback site. So first step, the login process is completely done by Microsoft. Different than before, it was done on the Yahoo page. Now it's completely done out of the Yahoo site on Microsoft. You log in with your known Microsoft credentials. Then you get the consent page. Okay, Yahoo wants to get your contacts, for example, want to reach your contacts, so you can authorize Yahoo to get always the contact information. Then you will go back with the callback, the redirect URI, and you will get an authorization code. Because you ask in the response about code, you will get as feedback the authorization code. Authorization code is you cannot authenticate with the authorization code. With the authorization code, you can get with a back channel to Microsoft an access token. So you present the authorization code and you ask for an access token. And with an access token, you can ask the Microsoft Graph API, for example, all your questions where you're authorized to, because you have asked about the scope when the consent is. Access token has a lifetime, and then with the authorization code, you can get new access tokens or refresh tokens. And on the Microsoft side, with your applications and app registration, enterprise applications, you can deny, or as administrator, you can remove the access from Yahoo to your Microsoft account. 10 years ago, the only possible way was to reset your password. So, what I said, if you know or now understand OAuth 2.0 in the basic, it's also about only about authorization. Another protocol which has authentication on it, which also works together with Microsoft Azure AD, is a small step from OAuth to OpenID Connect. So OAuth is only about authorization from can I read the context and also can I read the mail, or that kind of authorization, but there is no authentication in it. And with a small change, then you have the protocol OpenID Connect. So what's the difference? Let's take a quick look at it. OpenID Connect, we have again the Yahoo, you get the context from Microsoft. And you can see there's one thing added on the scope is scope OpenID. Okay, check. So let's move ahead, scope OpenID. Then the same process, the consent. And in the callback, there will be an authorization code again, but also a user ID token. So the information aloef@microsoft.com, for example, all that information is also turned back. So Yahoo now knows, instead of only an authorization code, which user has logged in. So it's more about authentication. Which user has logged in? You get more information, which is very important on the Yahoo side. And you have the back, and you can add the Graph API. This is basically how normally a flow for modern authentication works is under the hood. So one thing I want to mention is you also know JSON stuttered. It's always about JSON. The authorization code and the user ID token, they will be returned in a JSON web token. And that is an encoded JSON file, which is called back in the URL. One problem, I think is a problem, is there is no hard definition what is in the JSON file. So the JSON response you get, it's always in a GBT, but the info from, for example, Microsoft username is, if I do it, for example, for Google, I get other fields in my JSON. So it is always a little bit of tailor-made things you have to do. It's not one size fits all. That is what you will experience when you're going to work with this. So that is make it live IT, I think. So let's take a look at a small demo about this theoretical thing. Let's share my screen. And I have, let's see, I think this, yeah, this website. So let's take a look. We have, for example, the OAuth sandbox. It's an open source OAuth playground. So I will authorize using my account. You can see the complete flow. I have a special MFA user, which has a license also for Exchange Online, for example. I will log in. As you can see, I have the site OAuth. I will I am now redirected to Microsoft Online. Here you see the response type is code. Redirect URI is OAuth-play.azure website. So you can see the theory we done. You see it now in practice here in the URL. I get an MFA prompt. This is all done by Microsoft. I will accept. And I will, via the callback URI, I will be redirected. Oh, of course, I get the sandbox. Now, it is quite a lot what's asked for. So I consent. And as you can see, this was a request. An auto response type is code. And if I go further, I will see that there's also an OpenID thing I will have to check. It's this is all the scopes what was asked for. Let's see in a small thing here. Here you see scope is OpenID. So you will see all the things we just described. You see it here in the URI back. So here I have the authorization code we get back from the login. Now I ask for the tokens. With the authorization code, I ask for the tokens. So here I get the access token and the identity code. Now let's see if I get the access token. This is this base VR64. So if I go to the gvt.io, I can debug those JSON information. So here you can see, for example, what's in that JSON file. So my IP address, the name is MFA user. This is the scope I get. This is the consent you saw in your. This is the OAuth sandbox. It's from the proc. But all this information, if I do it with Google, I see some similar fields, but also other fields. So that is the magic we have to work with. So identity token. Now you also can see it's about this user. It's only possible because of that OpenID. If I remove that, you will know don't know that. Oh, it's too much for the. See. Oh, yeah. Here I get all thing about the user info. So it's nice to play with, and you can also test about all kind of get me the email or that kind of request. You can test authorization. It's also you see bearer. It's another term, a very well-known term from Microsoft to call that authorization token a bearer token, which you can access all kind of data where you are consented to. So here you also see the all the replies are in JSON format and that kind of things. So let's get back to the presentation. I think yeah, I have to hand over to Kenneth. This was a demo about OAuth.
Great, thanks, Erik. And I think actually the demo from Erik also showed us that actually having the right tooling available for you to understand what's going on is really important. So thanks for these websites as well, Erik. I think they are quite handy to use if you're trying to understand more of this whole authentication and authorization flow. So again, the question, so why modern authentication? Because it's a more secure solution. I hope the demos explain that to you. And again, a big reason to start using modern authentication is that it's a prerequisite to do a full conditional access implementation within your tenant. Yeah, I think that's important as well. I have seen many customers actually implementing conditional access without turning off legacy authentication and thinking that they were safe, which they are not. So let's do a small demo explaining how you can detect whether legacy authentication is being used within your own tenant. So if you have a browser screen open to your own tenant, if you are a global reader at least, you can decide to click with me and determine whether legacy authentication is in use within your tenant as well. Because if so, yeah, we have a call for action for you. So to do that, I'm going to my demo. I have a demo environment created, and within that demo environment, some users are created which actually log on. You can see actually that the environment has not been active for that long because I created it for the purposes of this demo. But it gives a good idea of a custom tenant. So the way to actually detect what's going on is actually by going to the sign-ins within Azure Active Directory, because within the sign-ins, all the sign-ins are being logged, and that can actually help us to determine whether legacy authentication is in place. So let's widen the scope, giving us some more login information. And what we can actually do is we can create a filter on client app. And what we can actually see when we create a filter on client app, that Microsoft already made a distinct between modern authentication clients and legacy authentication clients. There is one remark though, is that in the meantime, Microsoft also supports modern authentication for POP and IMAP, which is not reflected in this list. But take, for example, if we filter on mobile apps and desktop clients, we actually see which clients connect using modern authentication to our environment. And what's quite interesting here is especially the users Megan and Lee, who actually use the native mail app from either Gmail on Android or Apple, the Apple Mail app on iOS, to connect using modern authentication to the environment. And you have to believe it from me that while setting up these accounts, actually a consent request was requested and we had to approve it before access was granted. So it's not per se so that you need the Outlook client to do modern authentication. I do advise to start using the Outlook client though, but that has more to do with the fact that the Outlook client also gives us the possibility to provide app protection and app configuration policies. And we can, of course, wipe the data from the app from that point forward. So if we now adjust the filter again and just select all the legacy protocols. So one moment. We can actually do a filtering on all the legacy protocols accessing our environment. And as you can see, it's actually quite a long list. So let me check. What we can do is, for example, we can take Grady in this case. And Grady is a user who is actually using a legacy protocol to connect to the environment. In this case, it's IMAP4. So he has a client using IMAP4, which uses legacy authentication to connect to his mailbox. So what we can see here maybe is, well, he's not blocked by any conditional access policy, so that doesn't make sense here. And what we can do in order to get more grips on what conditional access policy is that we can actually forward this Azure AD logging to a log analytics workspace. I configured that as well, created a log analytics workspace within my tenant, and therefore within the log analytics workspace, I'm able to actually store more information than actually the 30 days that we have by default in Azure Active Directory. As you can see, we have a retention of 1 month. If you want more, it's wise to actually do that in log analytics. And one of the advantages of using log analytics is that we get the functionality of workbooks available. And workbooks are actually quite nice, also to explain to management why that legacy authentication is in use. and it's really nice because actually a dashboard is provided giving some more context on the usage of legacy authentication. So in this case, I have the workbook opened, sign-ins using legacy authentication, and you actually get a visual overview of legacy authentication in use, which is actually quite nice. And if you would really want to, you can display this on a big screen. This dashboard will help you along the way if you are going to phase out legacy authentication, because the end result will be that this dashboard will be empty. And if this dashboard is empty, you have done a great job. But it's not that easy, and I hope to explain that in the next couple of slides and the next demo I prepared. So to return to the slides. So there are actually two ways to transition from legacy to modern authentication. The first way is actually what I call the easy peasy way, and that's actually what everyone should do if they turn on a new tenant. So first of all, you need to check whether modern authentication is enabled. Well, as Erik already mentioned, within new environments, modern authentication is enabled. We can actually create a conditional access policy to block legacy authentication, and then we're finished, because nobody can access the environment using legacy authentication. And the only ways to access the environment is using modern authentication. Oh, and then you're finished. So, but again, that's not a real world scenario, because we have to deal with customers having an Office 365 environment for a while now, and we cannot just block their access. We need to start migrating users. So when we welcome everybody to the real world, it's a little bit more difficult than just blocking the legacy authentication using a conditional access policy. So there are more ways to do that, and I'm going to explain the way I currently do it in a large environment where users are using heavily legacy authentication protocols, and we cannot just cut them off, we need to migrate them. So the first thing we actually did is we did enable modern authentication. It was not enabled within that tenant, and because we actually had logging of all the ways the users log in to their mailboxes, we actually had reporting on which users were not using which mailbox protocols. And that's actually quite handy, because one of the first things you can do at that point in time is actually disable the protocols which are not being used. And therefore, actually, your security posture becomes less. What we did as well is we created authentication policies, and I will explain that in the demo later on. But actually, using authentication policies is the only way to block it at the front door. So if you are not using authentication policies, you will still see legacy authentication logging within your Azure Active Directory. So that's an important remark. We created supporting conditional access policy. For the demo, I created a couple of them, but not all of them. And we are actually migrating users one by one and helping them to transition from their built-in mail applications towards modern authentication apps. And within the project that I'm currently running, we are actually doing that to the Outlook app, because we are, as I said before, we are also then putting app protection policies on top of Outlook, and we have the option to buy the company data on those devices. Okay, so that brings us to the next demo. So let me switch to my tenant. So to explain first, when we look at our active users in a default tenant, actually, let's take Lee, for example. Lee is one of our test users. And if you look at the properties of Lee, actually by default has access to every mailbox protocol available by default. So this is not turned off, and this is a way to actually access the mailbox using either legacy EMAP, POP, or Exchange ActiveSync protocols. So what we did is, based on the reporting we had, we developed some scripts, and we were able to turn off POP and EMAP for like 95% of the users, because most of the users are using Exchange ActiveSync nowadays. So, so that can be a first measure to take. If we continue actually within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, I will save these settings. Not let it wait too long. Click on Show All, go to Settings, and then to the Organizational Settings. We can actually see whether modern authentication is enabled, yes or no. This used to be only possible within PowerShell, but Microsoft now provided a nice GUI, so we can use the GUI to check for modern authentication. And here you can see a couple of things. First of all, you can see whether modern authentication has been turned on. It's turned on, so we can leverage modern authentication. It doesn't say that it blocks legacy authentication from that point forward. That's an important remark. And one of the new things actually added by Microsoft is that you can actually create an authentication policy from the GUI by actually removing all the options described here, which will actually create an authentication policy blocking legacy authentication for these protocols. So you can still use the protocols, but you cannot use them with legacy authentication. I'll just click Save, and this is the easy peasy way. There's still a bug in the GUI because Outlook client is selected, but I will show you that it's actually disabled. One of the other things we can check as well, so let me close this one, is we can of course go to SharePoint as well, because for SharePoint modern authentication needs to be enabled as well. We go to Settings. Wait a minute, that's Access Control. And here we can say, hey, do we want to allow apps that don't use modern authentication? Well, we don't. So why not just block it and save that option as well? So let's go into a deep dive and show actually what's going on within the PowerShell options we have. So if we do a get authentication policy in a session which I already connected to save some time for the demo purposes. It has been a while, so it has to rebuild the session. But what you can see here is actually that because of the fact that I actually disabled those options within the GUI, a new authentication policy has been created with the name block basic and a unique code. So, and what you can see actually is that even though I disabled the options within the GUI, there are two services which are not covered by that. So that's something you need to be aware of. And another important remark is that actually that when you do a get organization config and you actually list the default authentication policy, you will actually see that this policy is now active for my tenant. And basically that means that this is now active for all the users. And basically it's actually the same as putting a conditional access policy in place which blocks legacy authentication, and therefore it's a real hard decision and not something you can do within an existing environment. So yeah, that's not again, it's not it's an option to do so. I advise to check this if you create a new tenant. Make sure that you have this right the first time, but you will notice that just disabling legacy authentication will not work, because like somebody already remarked in the meeting chat, not every application already supports modern authentication as well. So there will be exceptions which you must take into account when you create something like this. So where should we go now? Yeah, okay. I want to go back actually for the next part of the demo to explain something else, and that has to do with the fact that we can of course decide to actually turn off the mailbox protocols which support legacy authentication, and then we're done as well. And so, for example, in this case, when we go to Megan's account, we can just say, well, these are the protocols supporting legacy authentication. We disable them, and then we are finished. There's only one caveat here that has to do with Exchange Web Services, because Exchange Web Services is used, for example, by the agenda you have in your Teams client. So if you disable Exchange Web Services, you will not have the option of your agenda in your Teams client anymore. So we actually need it to be enabled within our tenant as well. Of course, if we don't, we break functionality. So that's one important remark. Again, we need to use the authentication policy so that we can block it at the front door, and that will also give us better logging in the Azure AD signing logging, actually giving us the possibility to use the logging to make sure that we have everyone in scope when we are migrating them to modern authentication. So, what we can do though is besides actually creating the default authentication policy, we can of course also create a common one. So let me see whether we can do that. So we can just create an authentication policy. It's called disable legacy in our case, and actually if we create it using the default parameters, it will actually block legacy authentication for all the users. And we have the option actually to, for example, say, well, we are going to migrate a user, and after that user is migrated and we know for sure that he is only using modern clients, we can actually assign that authentication policy to that user. And once we have actually done that, and we can, maybe let's see if I can get the information for this specific user, we can actually see that the authentication policy active for this user is the disable legacy authentication policy. And by doing so, we can actually have a phased migration. What we can do is when we are finished with all the users, and all the users have the authentication policy blocking legacy authentication, we can put the default authentication policy back in place and make sure that it actually blocks all the information. What we, for example, did within the project we are running now, that we also said, well, we are going to create a mark X, and from that point forward, we are going to create new users capable of using modern authentication only. Because if you don't do that, you are constantly migrating users. So that's something to take into account as well. The last thing I want to show is actually the conditional access policies we created in order to support this, and some clever way to actually let a conditional access policy help while migrating those users. So if we go back to Azure Active Directory, we actually can go to security and then to conditional access, and this actually displays the conditional access policies we created. But before we do that, I need to go back first and show you some of the groups I created. I created two groups for the demo purposes. The first one is actually the group containing my break class accounts. For people who worked with conditional access before, make sure that you have at least 2 break class accounts available within your environment that you don't regularly use, and make sure that those accounts are always excluded from conditional access. So that's a really important remark. And what I did is I actually created another group which actually contains all my active users within my environment. And I will explain the purpose of this group later, but as you can see, the group currently contains 24 members. If I go back to my conditional access policies, over here, you can actually see that a couple of them are created. I created one with a sign-in frequency for 2 hours so that I could get some more logging within my Azure AD logging. I had to type in my password a lot the last couple of days, but the log is filled, and that was the purpose. And I actually have 2 policies in place which help me to block legacy authentication. So actually the first one it blocks legacy authentication. It's targeted to all users. So if I create a new user within my tenant, legacy authentication will be blocked, and I actually exclude the group with my current users. And the idea is simple. If I migrate a user, just remove it from the group, and then it will have modern authentication from that point forward. As you can see, it's targeted towards all, and actually clients in this case. So it will block other clients, all the clients which don't do modern authentication. And you can see actually that it's a block policy, so that sign-in will be blocked by the policy. The other one I have available, and this is actually a lesson I learned from the latest Ignite session, is actually we have a similar one for Exchange Active Sync. Here again, it's targeted to all users. 2 groups are excluded, and actually we are targeting Office 365 in this case. This is a new app which you can use, and I strongly advise to start using this app if you are targeting your Office 365 environment. And the condition in this case is the client app, all the Exchange Active Sync client. The strange thing about this, though, is that we are actually not blocking within this policy, but we do a grant and we require an approved client app. And for the people to explain, an approved client app is actually an app which is written with the Intune SDK in it. So it supports Intune, and you can use it, for example, to make sure that you have an approved app. And by actually using this setting, when we activate this policy for the users, they will actually get a notification in their current email client that they need to install Outlook and to continue using the mail functionality. And that is something else than just blocking Exchange Active Sync, because if we do that, they just stop receiving email. So that's more like a hard stop from that point forward. So that would be my advice to do that in this way. By doing it like this, and I do realize that I may be explaining this very simplistic, we have control of how we are going to migrate users from legacy to modern authentication. If you have any questions about this, please reach out to me or Erik, and I'm more than willing to further explain what the concepts are. And also on my blog, I created some really lengthy blog posts as well, explaining the concepts behind this and what needs to be done. So to return to the presentation, the fact actually that we are now transitioning towards modern authentication doesn't mean that we are fully secure. And that actually has to do with the whole concept. So for people not aware of that or not at the session of Thijs last week, I strongly advise you to have a look at that session as well. Because if we just allow every cloud app to access company data, we still have an issue. So actually we need to govern the access to application consent, and there are some settings in there which actually recently changed. And again, we provided a link to the session of Thijs, and please have a look at that session to know what to do on that part as well. And actually that concludes our session from a slides perspective. So our call to action is to start blocking legacy authentication, and why not start with using or start with your newly created users first. So we have to make sure that those are not affected. And if not possible, we of course need to analyze the logs within Azure AD, turn on forwarding to a log analytics workspace so that we have more retention than 1 month, and we can have logging from there. And one important remark is that the fact that you may not be able to block a certain login using legacy authentication doesn't mean that we have no ways to block it at all. So it might be that we create a conditional access policy only allowing it from a certain one IP, for example. Important as well is to understand what OAuth 2.0 is. And I think that Erik actually provided us with the tools and with the means actually to get to know that for yourself. But if you are working with these kinds of things, make sure that you understand what you are talking about. Enable MFA, but you can only enable MFA successfully if everyone is transitioned to modern authentication. That doesn't mean that you need to turn on an MFA once you are migrated in total. You can turn it off already now, because if people are using modern authentication, they will be provided with an MFA prompt. So make sure that if you federate applications, that you know what kind of rights are being given to those federated applications. We have ways now to say, well, if it's small rights, that we automatically approve that consent. But if, for example, an application wants rights to all the mailboxes within an organization, you might want to do a due diligence on that vendor and make sure that your data, which is accessible by that service, is safe as well. Therefore, we actually need to govern the consent of the organization. And that actually concludes the slides of the presentation. And actually, the session is open now for any questions people have. I did see some things in the chat, but I didn't have time to look at that for now, so I just will scroll back. But if anyone has a question for me or Erik, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions, or you can do it in the chat if you prefer.
Thanks, Kenneth. I see one question. I think you are the best to answer this. Do you need Azure AD P1 or higher to send in the sign-in logs to a log analytics workspace and set up workbooks because you configure it?
Well, to be honest, in the beginning, you actually needed the P1 license for the workbook functionality. And in the meantime, actually, Microsoft promised to make it available for the non-premium ones as well. But to be honest, I haven't checked in a while whether that was the case. So I can do a quick check because I have a tenant using that, but I'm not really certain if that's already available. That's also with the work that we are doing. We always assume that we have, of course, a premium to Azure AD environment available, but we of course know that that is not always the case. So let me look. I now have a regular Office 365 environment where I have the workbooks option available within the GUI. But of course, you need to forward your Azure AD sign-in logging to a log analytics workspace in order for it to work. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Let's see another question from Mike. I will answer that. it's about the authorization code. It's base 64, easily decrypted. That's true, but it's transferred within an SSL tunnel between those two parties, and that's also in this case I had the implicit flow and explicit flow. In this case, you get with the authorization code, you will get it from a back channel. You will get the beer token. If you do, for example, if you have some kind of web application or which don't have the possibility for backend, they have the explicit flow. Then it always it will take in the browser. That is not secure. But if you do it on the back channel, you're also going to have IP whitelist and all that kind of things if you want. It's taken as secure, but the access token in combination with an allowed trusted point, that combination is trusted by default and is secure. But the code itself is not secure, but it's secured by the SSL tunnel HTTPS, which is used.
Okay. I see an interesting discussion indeed on the chat on actually the Outlook app, which has some disadvantages. I'm not saying that it's the Valhalla app, but I do have to say that most of those disadvantages actually have to do with the vendor of the operating system blocking access to certain functionality. For example, the fact that the context sync is not optimal when using Outlook on iOS has to do with the fact that actually Outlook or that Apple doesn't allow the context to resync back into your Outlook address book. And yeah, we see a lot of actually end users having problems with that, because one of the advantages on both iOS and Android is the fact that people can, of course, combine their mailboxes in a unified mailbox, having a unified agenda, etc. That is something we can accomplish, but then they also need to add, for example, their private accounts into the Outlook app. It's not per se so that the Outlook app is only for your work email. You can also, of course, have other email boxes as well. But I do agree that there will be less functionality if we start using the Outlook app. And I hope it will be fixed sometimes. Okay, yeah, great comment, Steve. How does one secure the break class accounts or still MFA enabled? Yeah, that's actually a good question as well, Ronald. The break class accounts, how to secure them? It's still by using maybe a fault and dividing the password in two. But putting any security measures provided by Microsoft actually poses the risk of locking yourself out in case something is wrong with conditional access, for example. So we have seen some companies using another third-party vendor to do MFA on those accounts. But on the other hand, I'm a little bit more pragmatic. But it should be a password not easy guessable, and make sure that it's stored in a safe location. Dennis asked, well, what about Mac OS users? Do they support Modern Authentication and iOS? Well, Dennis, one of the first things I actually showed is that iOS and even the built-in app supports Modern Authentication. So also the Gmail app supports Modern Authentication. On Mac OS, if you use the Outlook application, it supports Modern Authentication. I didn't do any testing with the built-in mail app, but I do suspect that it supports Modern Authentication as well. Yeah, so you could safely use that. But the fact actually that it now supports Modern Authentication doesn't mean that clients are connected using Modern Authentication, because it might be that they configured their app maybe a couple of years ago when Modern Authentication was not available. Kurt also makes a good remark about versions. when you are actually going to implement this, you will also run into the issue that Microsoft actually supports OS versions N, which is the current version, -1. And that actually means, especially with Android, that you might have to make the decision not to support Android 7, 8, 9, which you can still buy if you buy a cheap phone at the Aldi or the Lidl, for example. So make sure and maybe also create an inventory of the OS versions in use before you start the migration, because you cannot support every OS version. And the same actually goes for iOS, where actually we can now support iOS 14, which is the current version, and iOS 13. That means that iOS 12, it might work, but it might not work as well. It's not supported, so we should get rid of that as well. And that means that people with an iPhone 6, I think iPhone 6 cannot upgrade to iOS 14 anymore. So I think they can support 13, but they need to start worrying about maybe buying a new phone. Let me see some other remarks. Peter provided a lot of answers as well. Thanks for that, Peter. Okay, so I think there are no more questions that need to be addressed in the chat. That might conclude our meeting. As you might have seen, we are recording this meeting, so we are going to put it on YouTube. Well, I hope you know how to reach us. So if you have any follow-up questions, please reach out to us. And I will hand over the presentation to Peter.
I see some one last question from Ferry about conditional access for just Office 365 accounts.
Yeah, a good question, Ferry. What actually Microsoft provides nowadays is the so-called security defaults. So within, if you don't have a premium license, you can turn on the security defaults. And one of the settings in the security defaults is actually that it blocks legacy authentication. But you will actually miss out if you need to migrate users, because if you enable the security defaults, from that point forward, legacy authentication will be blocked for all your users.
Yeah. Isn't it true that all new tenants, the security defaults are enabled?
Yeah, in the communication it is. But for example, my demo tenant, which I created using the demos environment, actually still had the security defaults turned off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it's worthwhile to check if you create a new and don't believe Microsoft from the document.
Now, from my opinion, security defaults you can put it, but you have to enable it. It's not enabled by default, because then you have to set up MFA for the first time. So it's not enabled at default. My experience.
We might have a chicken egg problem there, indeed. Yeah.
Alrighty, thank you very much. Thanks, Kenneth. Thanks, Erik. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. And thanks for our sponsors, of course. All right.
Yes.
Have a nice evening.
Okay.
Bye bye.